everyone, it is Jazz here, and today it is time for yet another 5 book reviews. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to be reviewing today. I have left the time code links below if you want to skip around and choose what books you want to watch me review, or you can watch the entire video if you so choose. That is up to you, but let's jump into what I'm planning to review today. Isolde, Queen of the Western Isles, the first book in the Tristan and Isolde novels by Rosalind Miles. Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Susann. The Giant Killer, or The Battle Which All Must Fight by Charlotte Maria Tucker, also known as A.L.O.E. The Girl Who Ignored Ghosts, the first book in the Unbelievable series by Casey Tansley, and The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. Starting off with Isolde, this is an Arthurian legend retelling, obviously focusing on the story of Tristan and Isolde. If you don't know who Tristan and Isolde are, they're basically kind of like the Romeo and Juliet of Arthurian legend. They have that star-crossed lover situation going on, but it's kind of way more complicated than Romeo and Juliet's story. But if you like forbidden love, that's what their story is. This first book in the series covers a lot about Isolde and her background and culture. She is the daughter of the Queen of Ireland, but the Queen of Ireland is not the most stable person. So Ireland is basically on the brink of war with England at this time, and a lot of tensions in the story come from that situation and Isolde trying to make a semblance of peace between the two countries. This book also obviously includes how her and Tristan meet and their situation and how this sort of general issue with politicalness causes quite a lot of issues in their relationship. I quite enjoyed this, and I was very happy that I enjoyed it for the most part, because I haven't had the best track record with Arthurian legend retelling, and I really wanted to find one that I at least liked and enjoyed, and luckily I did like this one quite a bit. I also think a lot of that comes from that the kind of favorite part of reading like Le Morte d'Arthur or Arthurian legend things tends to be, for me, the Tristan and Isolde story. I think that's like the best story out of all the stories in my personal opinion. So this focuses on like my favorite thing in the Arthurian legend, because let's face it, they're the most interesting couple. Sorry, Arthur and Guinevere and Lancelot. We'll say that this book does lean towards the melodrama, but I think that fits the general tone of Arthurian legend, because I do think there's a certain level of melodrama in there, and I like melodrama when it's done right, and this is, to me, melodrama done right. I actually think it adds a little bit of sort of comfort and levity in a story that could get really depressing eventually. I haven't read the whole series. I think the political intrigue element of this is quite interesting, which makes it not just a romance, although there is quite a bit of romance in the story, obviously. And also, I do think it's interesting that it kind of explores the ideas of the differences between the patriarchal society and a matriarchal society in the story. Overall, I think the characters are pretty well developed. I didn't fall in love with anybody in particular, but I do think they're definitely more developed than you will get in any kind of 14th century written story. And I definitely liked these characters enough to want to follow along in their journey and see what was going to happen to everyone. And the book also has quite an interesting, like, fun, amusing subplot to it, which I thought was a nice addition to the story, just to sort of get Arthur and Guinevere in there somewhere, even though they aren't the main characters in the story. So though I probably won't dive into the next book in the series for a long while, I do want to follow up on this series, and I did, like I said, quite enjoy it, so I gave Isolde, Queen of the Western Isle, 4 stars. Next up is Valley of the Dolls. This follows 3 women, Anne, Jennifer and Neely, who are basically progressing through their lives, and they end up struggling with the corruption that comes with fame for some, drug addiction, and dealing with some very negative relationships in their lives. So it's a hard-hitting one. I believe this is the third time that I read Valley of the Dolls, but it was the first time reading it in the 50th anniversary edition. This edition features some additional stuff in the front. That is some writing that Jacqueline and Susann did about people's reaction to this book, as well as a foreword written by Simon Doonan. It's some interesting additional material if you do want to check it out. So obviously, because I've reread this a couple of times, I quite love this book. It's definitely a book for people that like extremely flawed characters and some downright unlikable characters. It's definitely dealing with some triggering topics, and I imagine when this book came out that it was quite a shocking book, because honestly, I, on a reread, still think it's a shocking, like, gives you a shock to your system kind of book. But if you like that kind of thing, if you really like psychological deep dives and you don't mind unlikable characters or characters making really bad decisions, this may be the book for you. I think my favorite thing about the story is the writing itself. Jacqueline Susann has a lot of wit to her writing, and I really like that spin. I also think that that writing style really serves the story, because this book could get so depressing if it didn't have a lot of wit and a little bit of sarcasm to this. Like I said, this does cover 3 main topics, which is the super dark side of fame, drug addiction. All these little pink dots on here are actually pills, because all these characters deal with addiction to what they call dolls, aka prescription drugs. So that's all going on, and on top of that, there are some really dysfunctional relationships covered in this, both in friendship as well as romantic entanglement. Jacqueline Susann does not shy away from any dark element of that sort of journey. So she definitely sought out to be kind of honest about relationships, as well as what the entertainment industry can do to people. This one is another melodrama done right. I think that there is a certain hyper realism or hyper surrealism about the tone of this book. Except in the terms of this book, the melodrama doesn't really bring levity. It just adds to like the hyper emotionalism that is manifesting in the characters. I don't necessarily think that Valley of the Dolls is a book for everyone. I think if you, like me, really like psychological deep dives into character, then you may enjoy this story, but I do think that there are some people that would kind of find Valley of the Dolls off-putting. So it depends on your personality and what you think that you may like. But I personally have always really loved this book, because that is kind of my jam, and I like books that explore sort of the dark side of fame. It's kind of also my jam. So I gave Valley of the Dolls 5 stars. I know you read widely when you can go from a story like Valley of the Dolls to Christian fiction just in a snap, which is what we're gonna do now. So The Giant Killer, or The Battle Which All Must Fight. This is a Christian allegory children's story. It follows a family of children, and 2 of their cousins decide to come and stay and live with them, and it causes some issues within the dynamic of the household, and the mother of these children and also the aunt of these 2 cousins decides that she is going to tell them a story about a knight and how he slays several giants. Each giant represents sloth, anger, pride, and selfishness, and the purpose of her telling the story is to sort of help the children work out for themselves how they should behave and be treating each other. I actually ended up reading this book quite by accident. I was subbing for someone in the homeschool tutorial that I have been teaching at, and part of the lesson was to read a chapter of this book, so I wanted to read the previous chapters to the chapter that the kids were on, and once I got started reading it, I wanted to read the whole entire thing because I just thought it was really an interesting way of approaching an allegorical story, and I also am a Christian myself, so I thought the ideas were really fun to read and explore. I'm a big fan of allegory, and I do think that this is allegory done in a different way that I haven't really seen, because there are the two stories going on congruently. So you have the children in the household listening to this story about the giant killer, and because of that, you get an analyzation of the allegory within the tale, which I really thought was intriguing and interesting. So basically, when the tale was told by the mother and it was over, the kids would analyze what the story was about and what their mother was trying to say about something. And thus, if you were a kid reading this, or even if you're an adult reading this book and you missed something in the allegory in the analyzation of it yourself, you would get an analyzation within the book. And I think that was a really cool element of this. The characters in it were not perfect people. I feel like in something like Heidi or something like that, you end up with a character that just like can do no wrong and is like practically perfect in every way, but not in like a fun Mary Poppins way. You know what I mean? And these characters at least had flaws and like things to work through, and even when they didn't totally work through them, they still like had the knowledge that they wanted to work on these things, and they didn't start off as like these perfect little beings. Like even the well-behaved children had a lot of like little problems, and I think that's realistic to people in general. Like even those of us that are trying to work on ourselves have little issues about ourselves that are maybe not so favorable that we might want to like work on to like improve our interaction with other people in society. Now, you do have to have a appreciation for old school children's literature and that sort of writing style, because that is definitely what this is. If you don't mind that, or you're used to reading that, you shouldn't have any issues with this writing style, but if you're not used to that, you may have to get used to it to enjoy the story overall. You do have to be a little careful about the edition that you end up with. I read the first part of this in physical copy because someone had lent me the book to teach that class, but obviously I had to return that. So I ended up picking up an ebook on Kindle and also the audiobook on LibriVox, or the LibriVox app, because that was the free version of the audiobook because it's public domain. And both of those editions do have a lot of issues. The ebook has some of the names written incorrectly, in sometimes not the most unhilarious way. They're pretty hilariously botched. And also the audiobook that's on LibriVox is missing a chapter. So I do think that this is something that I would like to have in my collection, and I will probably get a physical copy of it so that everything is correct. But between the two, I ended up having a decent reading experience. Because I'm a big fan of analyzing some allegory, and it was a really cool approach to Christian allegory, I gave this 5 stars. Then we have The Girl Who Ignored Ghosts. This follows a character named Kat Preston who can see ghosts, but she's had quite a lot of issues with that, and a ghost sort of being a negative experience for her. And in the world building of the story, the only way you can sort of avoid the ghost-like activity is to not believe in ghosts, which is why the series is called The Unbelievables. So she's worked very hard to avoid and like kind of push down the idea of ghosts in her mind. However, she ends up getting an assignment from a professor at her college to go to this castle with a group of people and solve this mystery, and it sort of brings up a lot of issues with ghosts. The story is a part time travel story, part ghost story, part mystery, so it's an interesting blend of genres. At first, when I started this book, I did not think I was going to enjoy it that much. I just kind of thought the first sort of quarter of it was okay. I did think that the setup, the story was pretty intriguing, but I have to say that there was a lot of just telling exposition on some of the world building, which I wasn't a super fan of, and I do have to say that there are some holes in the world building in terms of that belief and disbelief situation that don't necessarily make sense. As the story went on, I got more and more invested, and that is because the time travel element of this story is particularly intriguing, and the way that it's done is really interesting, but also I do really think the mystery is the highlight of this book. It was really fun just seeing how the mystery was being solved with the story and seeing the different characters involved in that, and I do think that helped me really dive into the story. So what started as just kind of an okay read, I ended up really liking. It's a nice balance of plot driven and character driven, which I really appreciate, and I do think that the dialogue in it is quite amusing. The fact that this accomplishes what I think the goal of the story was, which is to just be a fun mix of genres with a fun YA adventure plot of the story, I think that it accomplishes its goal in that aspect. So I was willing to overlook that it did have some world building issues in terms of not only the way it was expressed, but also the way it was occasionally executed. But considering that the book was just entertaining to read, if you're just looking for something short and entertaining, this one does that job. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I don't know if I'll jump into the next book in the series right away, but I wouldn't be opposed to jumping into another story like this. Lastly, we have The Girl Who Drank the Moon, which I have already talked about nonstop on this channel, but I'm going to talk about it at least one more time. This is a middle grade fantasy story. It focuses on a couple of different people and groups of people. The first one is a group of people called the Protectorate. Every year, the Protectorate sacrifices a baby to the forests so that it can be given to this witch to keep the witch from terrorizing the town. However, this turns out to actually be a complete misunderstanding because the witch, Susann, keeps thinking that these people keep leaving these random babies out in the woods, and so she ends up taking in these babies. Now, usually she feeds them starlight so that they can survive their journey to a new home, and she gives these children away to new homes. But in the particular year in which this book starts, she finds this baby and she accidentally gives the baby, who ends up being called Luna, moonlight. And that gives Luna incredible magic. And thus, Susann has to take this child into her own home so that she can help her hopefully control the magic that she has accidentally given her. And Luna ends up growing up with a swamp monster and a dragon and Susann, and the story kind of goes on from there. Since I've talked about this a lot, you can tell that I love this story. It is a weird mixture of being incredibly adorable and also incredibly creepy at the same time. It is the epitome of cute, but kind of creepy, and my little cute but kind of creepy soul loves it. Please recommend more books to me that are cute but also creepy, because I need that in my life. This is another one that is quite allegorical, so yay. I think one of the main elements of this, because it covers a lot of concepts, but I think a strong concept that I really enjoyed about this is that it covers ideas about lies, truth, and half-truth, and also omission and misinformation, and how those things can really very much affect how different people interact, and how those can have big consequences, how sometimes you think you're helping somebody by not telling them all the information, but it's not necessarily something that helps in the long run, and also how people will use misinformation and lies and half-truths for their advantage and political sort of upheaval. It's a really well executed in a way that all ages could probably enjoy and get something out of in terms of the allegory of that particular element of the story. But the story also contains a lot of things about found family, what that means, about your actual family and how those interactions can be, a lot of things about hard choices and being sort of caught between a rock and a hard place and how to navigate those issues. I think that the characters really shine. They're either really, really endearing or they're really, really menacing if they are a creepier character, and there's a lot of different dynamics to investigate and invest in terms of all the different elements of this story. I did listen to this on audiobook and then later get myself a copy of the book for my collection because I enjoyed it, and the audiobook is quite lovely. I really love how the reader read the story. I think it's well done and well executed, so definitely check out the audiobook. So if you two like cute but kind of creepy middle grade literature, I think this is a book that you will also enjoy. I personally gave it 5 stars. Those were my 5 book reviews. I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. Drop me a comment below just to say hello, or to also just say something on these books or recommend some books. I would really appreciate that. Comments really do help out the channel. And that is it for today, my fabulous peeps. I will see you all soon. Bye!